Hello. In this recording from our Justia webinar, From Potential to Pitfalls, How AI is Shaping the Future of Legal Practice, Matt Wetherington dives into AI's impact on the legal profession, from transforming research and drafting to tackling challenges like bias and data security. Remember, if you'd like to see more Justia videos on law practice and legal marketing, be sure to subscribe to our channel.
Hello, everyone, and thanks for letting me be here. So, the first thing that I want to make sure everyone knows is that if you have any questions while we're doing this, my email is matt@wfirm.com. If we don't get to your question at the end, or you just have something that's specific to you, you can always reach out to me. I'm a practicing attorney. We do personal injury and wrongful death cases in Georgia, and I'm presenting this from the perspective of an attorney who is using these tools to try and help my law firm do a better job for our clients, to get better outcomes and things of that nature. I don't have any financial interest in AI. I don't have any company or product that I'm here to sell. My sole goal is to give you actionable information that you can use to make your practice stronger and better. So kind of the first question is is AI overhyped or underhyped? And when you listen to the people who are deeply involved in AI and the development of AI, they talk about it as if it's kind of the second coming of humanity, or more important than electricity or fire. And I tend to agree with those assessments. I'm definitely in the camp of someone who believes that this is a much bigger deal than anything that we've dealt with in our lifetimes, and possibly a bigger deal than a lot of things that we take for granted. And so that's my perspective. So I think it's important that you know that at the beginning, so that you can kind of decide how much credibility or weight to give to what I'm going to tell you about kind of the hazards and the opportunity of AI. I'm definitely in the camp of this is very powerful and very dangerous. So what I want to do is just start with kind of what I'll call the best stuff first. And I'm going to go through some real world examples and show you where the technology is heading. And then we'll talk about how it got there and then where it's going. So first thing I want to make sure that you recognize and understand is that you've been using AI for a long time. Like AI as a tool that uses machine learning or prediction engines, you've been doing it for a long time. Like when you're using Alexa or spell check, or typing into your phone. If you even remember like T9 and the old phones, I mean, that was a form of artificial intelligence. And you've been using these tools for a long time. Where things are starting to get weird now is that AI is just much more than text. So here's an example of using these same tools being used for audio. So this is a tool called Suno. You can type in a prompt like asked for a 90s country ballad about AI, and it produces, a song that you could probably hear on the radio.
Over, hide or under, I'm just waiting, you will see. I'm no one-trick pony.
And you can also then do this for video. It looks like it's gonna slow down here on me, but that's okay. So you can also do this for video. Let me get it right for you. There we go. And this is using ChatGPT's video production tool, and then using a free tool to allow you to layer on a face of somebody. So I can put my face on this video using open source tools right now. And if you're looking at this video and saying, well, that looks kind of dumb, the same thing though, when you're not using it to make novelty videos like mine, it's pretty passing. So this is the same ChatGPT Sora tool, and this is the video that it produces from just a prompt of make a guy looking at the camera. I mean, I think this is a very real looking image, and it's just going to continue to get better. You can also use AI to predict what images will look like. So here's an example from a motor vehicle case. And in this case, we had photos that were from the wreck scene, and we were trying to identify eyewitnesses. So using a tool called Topaz, that's Topaz, we were able to have it output about 10 images that it thought were loosely approximating what that person looked like. So you look at the grainy image on the left, and then you look at the artificially enhanced image on the right. of what they thought the person would look like. We were then able to take that image and then put it into a different tool called Topaz. To a typical tool called PIMEYES, PIMEYES, and use that as a facial recognition tool to find other images of those 10 predictive images that it made to see if we could find the person. And in that case, we did. We were able to find that was able to accurately predict what the person looked like. And using those prediction images, we're able to actually find the eyewitness based on its facial recognition of the artificial image to find real images. And this is just me plugging in my face into the tool. And you'll see that it finds images of me online where I have a full beard, I have no beard, where I'm looking completely down, or where I'm looking to the side or wearing a costume. And even when you're like in the background of an image here, like this is a news story, and it's able to pull those images and find us online. Whereas if you were to just put, an image, and if you're familiar with doing reverse image search and finding other examples of the same image, this is kind of taking that to the other level, and it's able to do this across all kinds of things, whether it be audio, video, as well as kind of what I'll call geographic data, where you're using like GPS coordinates or inferring GPS coordinates from images. So it's more than text that we're talking about today, but text is the biggest feature. And the key thing with all of these text tools is to use it to its strengths. So strength number one being that it's able to take structured data and turn it into meaningful information. So here it is, just giving it an accident report. And accident reports are something that my firm has been working on for years. And I would say working on them poorly. And as a result of that, we've been trying to create tools that will take this structured data and turn it into actionable information. But here's the thing, at least in Georgia, our accident reports had almost 400 examples of fields. So whether it's, if you just look on this page right here, you've got whether what unit number it is, you've got the last name and first name of multiple people, you've got their addresses, you've got whether they're wearing seatbelts, you've got the weather, you've got the street condition, drug testing, all of these fields. And then as you add more vehicles or more occupants, you just get more and more fields. And so the problem that we had was trying to account for those 400 fields and how every accident might have something different. And ChatGPT doesn't suffer from that problem. It's able to take all of the structured data, understand the structure, and then output a meaningful text output that summarizes it. So this is an accurate output of this. So using this, I could say, for example, give me the letter, the address and a letter of representation to the insurance carrier, or give me the address of the defendant so I can send them a notice of representation or a spoliation letter, and I can give it a template as well that says, hey, let's move on from there. But aside from then taking that structured data and putting it into a meaningful format, we can also then ask it to do analysis. So here is an example from a summary judgment motion. And I'm going to give you kind of the facts so you can see how ChatGPT is working. So cars are backed up in bumper to bumper traffic. We've got a passenger in an Uber, and the passenger is not paying attention at all. They're looking at their phone. The driver makes a left turn and then immediately gets hit by a car. All right. The driver admits that they couldn't see oncoming traffic because of the bumper to bumper nature of the traffic, but the plaintiff testified that he couldn't cite anything that the driver did wrong because he didn't see anything. So the defense moved for summary judgment on the basis that the plaintiff can't just have an accident and then claim that the driver did nothing wrong without knowing exactly what they did wrong. All right. So feeding in both briefs to ChatGPT, we're then ask it to then say, play the role of a clerk advising the court and lay out the framework for an answer. Don't give me an answer. I want you to give me the framework for an answer. And so what does ChatGPT do? Well, it does the right thing. It identifies the standard for summary judgment. It then identifies what the legal claim at issue is and its elements. And then it identifies the factual issues that may have bearing, including citations, rules, or statutes that come into play. And in this case, it was the official code of Georgia statute on making sure that a roadway is clear before you enter it. So it identifies the rubric for a proper answer. And then we ask it, okay, fine. Now applying that rubric, give me your analysis. And what it determines is that although the plaintiff doesn't know what happened, the defendant testified that they didn't have a clear line of sight. So applying that fact to the statutes on entering a roadway, then that sounds like a jury question. And then on causation and comparative fault, it also says that the driver here claims that the other person may have been acting negligently, but those are jury questions, not summary judgment questions. So conclusion then becomes summary judgment should not be granted. And this is ChatGPT's analysis just of two briefs, looking at the facts that they were citing in both briefs and outputting the correct answer, at least in this case. And for those of you who are saying like, but that's kind of obvious when summary judgment is something everyone knows, first note that it's amazing that we can now say that like something like this is obviously something the AI can do well. But it goes beyond that too when we look at complex cases. So I took the most recent, like as of this CLE, like the most recent Supreme Court case that I could find. And it was a criminal case. And in the criminal case, it was a murder case. And this is from the Georgia Supreme Court. And in that case, the defendant had claimed, it was alleged to have shot her boyfriend after asking him to leave the house multiple times. And then she claimed that her counsel was ineffective and withdrew defenses that she thought were valid. And also that the judge in that case was impartial because he had an off-the-record meeting with the attorneys who represented the state. Those are the issues that were on appeal. So I plugged in all of the briefs that were filed in the case and then asked ChatGPT to analyze it. And the analysis that it came back with was very extensive, so I'm only going to give you a sampling of it. But what it noted was that, number one, it correctly identified the standard for judicial impartiality. And it honed in on this key fact that the conversation that the judge had, quote, off the record was anyone could have heard it. It was public and it was unrelated to trial issues. And the jurors did not even see the conversation or know the substance of it. It identifies the correct legal standard for impartiality and recusal and says that talking to the lawyers about law school and updates on health news, that's not bias. It says deny the motion on recusal. And then as to the defenses, it walked through the elements of each defense, which was actually very complex. And which is why I'm not going to show you the slide just because it would be 500 words of text and that's boring. But it correctly identified the legal standard, the facts that were important to it, and then outputted saying that the trial court should be affirmed on all counts. So we then go to that decision being, the Supreme Court then issued that decision and they affirmed on all counts for the exact same reasons that the ChatGPT said that they should. It cited the same cases, it had the same reasoning, and in my having done this with Georgia Supreme Court specifically cases for about a year and a half now, I would say that ChatGPT, just from plugging in the briefs, is about 90% accurate at predicting how the court would rule. I think it's about 60% accurate as to why the court rules that way, but we are talking about more often than not already ChatGPT and Claude and even Gemini are able to correctly predict the outcome of cases based solely on briefing. And then if you give it additional context like oral argument transcripts, or you give it, facts that it may not know about policy decisions, that number kind of ticks up even more. But at that point, you're kind of injecting your own personal opinions into it, but it is there. And there's a question here about which ChatGPT version I used for this case brief analysis. On this one, I used 4.0. So just standard 4.0 that you get with the $20 Pro version. But I got the same output from Gemini, which is free. Camera up here. But I don't want to give you the impression that it's all perfect. So here's a study from Stanford, which was done in May of 2024. And what they found when asking it legal specific questions that were formulated by expert was that AI either cited the wrong case or gave the wrong outcome roughly around 20-25% of the time. And that Lexis has some specialized tool that were wrong about 17% of the time, Westlaw's tool was wrong about 30% of the time, and then GPT was wrong a little bit less than half of the time. But again, number one, that's using GPT-4, not even 4.0 at the time for GPT. And that was May of 2024. And they didn't share the prompts that they used. So I suspect that with better prompting, that number could go up. And I also think that this reporting that it was wrong 17% of the time is the wrong way to look at this. I think if you just flip those numbers, it becomes pretty shocking. What they're really saying is that, between 30%, around 30% of the time, close to 70% of the time, all of these AI tools are right, and they're right for the right reasons, which I don't know many attorneys that can correctly predict 70% of case outcomes or legal answers across all legal domains. Like I could give you 100% right most of the time on personal injury or wrongful death in Georgia, but if you were to ask me about criminal law or property, I'm probably going to get none of those correct. And even when I do get it correct, I'm going to get it correct for the wrong reason. So these tools are very powerful, very impressive, and they're going to continue to get better. And especially when you look at it in the context of the current, what I'll call wrong rate of trial judges. So at least for Georgia, for the Court of Appeals, it's about a 15% reversal rate. And then it goes to about 6% for the Supreme Court. That's helpful for Georgia. Most of you are not in Georgia. So the federal court's appellate reversal rate's around 8%. So ChatGPT and AI tools are right now about 3 times less accurate than humans, or at least in terms of getting the right answer for the right reason. But again, those numbers are going to continue to go up over time. And this stuff is just going to get more and more powerful. Okay, so that's kind of the dog and pony show, so to speak. Let's now go into the nuts and bolts of how this works and what it's doing. So first key question is, what are we talking about? Let's get on the same page about what we're talking about when we talk about AI. So most people are talking about, the 11-time All-Star, the Atlanta hero, the MVP Rookie of the Year, Allen Iverson, who is one of the greatest basketball players ever, and has done a great job. Like that's the typical definition of AI, at least until about 4 years ago. And now we're talking about AI as artificial intelligence. So the easiest way to think about what artificial intelligence is to think about a human being. And what do all human beings have in common? Got a brain. And the brain is this magical thing that's able to solve problems. It's creative. It writes books. It writes songs. It loves. It eats pizza and really enjoys it. It drafts motions to dismiss. It does all of these amazing, incredible things. But at the same time, the brain is also this very, very dumb thing that is very poorly understood by humanity. We don't know what happens when we're dreaming. We don't know what happens when. There we go. We don't know what happens, like the relationship between the brain and the gut. We don't know why we sleep. We don't know what our DNA does. We don't know so much about the human brain, and humans themselves do so much dumb stuff that we don't understand. Like, why do we have addiction? Why do we have depression? Why do we self-harm? Those are the things that we don't understand about the brain. And I think it's important to keep that in context when we talk about the shortcomings of AI and why they exist, because at the end of the day, AI itself is literally supposed to be simulated brains. And that's not my definition. That's the definition that is used by all of the smart people who are working on AI. That's the foundational model of what AI is and how it's supposed to work. Like simulated brains, that's what OpenAI's founders have used as their model. That's what Google uses. That's what Joffrey at Google, who's now leading the Center for AI Safety, whatever that is, they all talk about it as simulated brains because that's in fact what it is. So with that kind of rubric in place, it's a lot easier to understand how AI is created and where the problems lie. So how do you eat an elephant? You eat the elephant one bite at a time. How do you train a child to learn how to read or to walk? You do it by giving them examples. You do it by leading them, by showing them and exposing them to new ideas. And you give them feedback. When a child makes a mistake, you give them feedback on what they did wrong and how they can do better. And then you give them opportunities to succeed. AI is the exact same thing. Like you're able to give AI data. You train it on that data and you decide what data it gets and the format that it gets. You then tell it this information is books, this information is music. And then you ask it questions like, which of these is music? Which of these is a book? And iterate over time to the point that it's able to correctly identify what a book is or what music is. Like this is the iterative process and the quote training. When we talk about like GPT is a generative pre-trained model. That pre-trained, the P and pre-trained is that iterative process where they're giving it feedback on the answers that it came. If you've ever seen Silicon Valley, there's a great scene where they spend a bunch of time, energy, and money developing a program that is able to tell if something is a hot dog or not a hot dog. And they just basically showed it pictures of millions of things, sausages, cars, TVs, apples, and was like, which of these is the hot dog? And identifying which one is the hot dog. And then you scale that up to the point where once it knows what an apple is and what an orange is and what a cucumber is, eventually it figures out that what an eggplant is without you doing that specific training. And then eventually it understands what a salad is. And then somehow from there, it jumps in and figures out what math is. And that is the generative aspect of the tools. When we talk about GPT, generative, it's able to figure out which information, new information based on old information. The more data that you give it, the more examples that you give it, the more retraining you give it, the stronger and better it's going to perform. And I got a question here that says, which input or output is coder selected versus actual code derivatives in an if-then format? All right, that's a great question. And I'll break that down. So what they're asking about is how much of this is going to be the generative part of the AI deciding what it's going to answer versus how much of it is inputted in. And so we'll talk about that in a second. But the question is, how do you know when something is pre-programmed or even censored versus when something is generated and doing it itself, or how much of its code, for example, is going to be self-created? And the answer is that we don't know because of something called hidden layers, which is not something malicious, but as we filter through and try and figure out like how the AI made a decision, you're not able to do it. The same way as if I ask you like, what is your favorite color? You might say red or blue or green. But then if I ask you why, specifically why, is that your favorite color? You're not going to be able to do it. You might be able to say, I like the color. You might be able to say, I like peaceful things like clouds. But how you ended up at that being your favorite color is not something you're going to be able to answer. And the same thing is true with all of these generative models. If you were to ask them, why did you give me this answer to this question? Number one, it'll just make things up the same way that humans will sometimes, and just because it thinks that that's the right thing to do. But in terms of like, if you were to ask me, like, cut the machine open and then force it to tell you the answer, it can't do it. And this is kind of the black box nature of AI that makes it dangerous, where we're not able to fully understand how it arrives at its outputs. Like, how does it know that it's a hot dog versus not a hot dog? And when it decides that something is a hot dog, what was the specific reason that it did that if that picture was not in its training data? And so as we're talking about like how these things create these tools, kind of one of the core concepts is that the more data that you feed these models, the smarter and better it's going to perform. So when you think about Siri as having, a limited base of knowledge, like, let's say they trained it on 5,000 parameters. And then you move to Alexa and they trained it on 5 million parameters. And then you get to something like ChatGPT, and we're suddenly dealing with billions and billions of parameters. And by parameters, we're talking about data. And as the more and more data is fed into these machines, the more it gets difficult to understand what was the basis for it learning this thing? How, for example, did it learn Spanish based on reading solely English literature? Or how did it suddenly understand how to cure certain types of cancers just by reading medical literature about existing cancer treatments? It's identifying patterns and information that we don't understand, and it's based on that data. So when this first came along, I asked, one of the creators of OpenAI, back when you could still get them into a room and interview them with someone who, like me, who is a nobody. But I talked to him. I was like, when do we have enough data that the AI becomes dangerous, to where it's just smarter than all of us and it's just like omnipowerful? And what he told me was that even if you were to take the entirety of data that exists in the human world right now, it is still nowhere near enough for us to have a model that could be, what they call AGI, or more intelligent than a human. Fast forward 2 years later, and now we have AI that is creating its own data to train itself on. So if you were trying to train it on, writing a book, and you give it 1 billion examples of books, the AI is now writing 10 billion books itself, and then recursively training itself on those books that it wrote. And using that, it's multiplying the amount of data that is available for training using what we call synthetic data. And then when you look online now and we talk about, well, what if we trained it on the real world? Well, every article that you read online these days appears to at least be AI assisted. So what's the line between human data and AI data now, at least online? I would argue that that line is very blurry. And so it's not a hard reach to think that we're going to be getting to the point now where AI synthetic created training data is going to be many multiples of existing real world data for AI. The other thing to keep in mind is that context matters. So we've got our training data, but that doesn't always give us context. So when we talk about prompt engineering or giving a good prompt, I talked earlier about the testing where they didn't reveal for the legal questions what their prompts were. And so when we talk about prompt engineering, what we're really talking about is giving it information and context for a good answer. So if I were to ask, for example, ChatGPT or any of these AI tools, your goal is to give me information to help me as an attorney make a decision about a case or to predict an outcome. The context is going to be, I'm going to give you additional information. I'm going to give you briefing. I'm going to give you a series of cases that I want you to take into account. And your answer needs to be in the following format, and it needs to have inline citations and be based on the plain text reading of the cases that I provide you. I'm going to get a much better output than if I were to just ask it to tell me about summary judgment in Georgia, or if I were to give it a complaint and say, do you think I win this case? And so that's the first kind of takeaway that I want you to have here is, number one, when you see all of those examples of people where it's hallucinating cases and things like that, do not use these tools, at least in their current form, for legal research. The much better approach is to do your own legal research, but then give it all of the cases that you find that are relevant as part of your prompt, as that context aspect. Say, I'm working on this motion to dismiss, or this motion for summary judgment, or this motion in limine, and I want to apply the facts of my case to existing precedent. And I'm going to give you all of the precedent that I think is relevant. And I want you to take that precedent and then apply it to my facts and give me an output that is based on the plain text reading of the cases. And then I want you to apply confidence levels to each of your answers. So you'll see sometimes if you do that, it'll come back and say, I think this issue is a toss-up, or I think this issue has a 90% chance. Like most recently, we had a motion before a judge, and we were internally at our firm, we were conflicted. We were conflicted on internally what to do. Like we were entering into settlement talks, and this motion was dispositive. And so putting into all of the AI tools with all that nervous energy that I had about those cases, it consistently came out and said, you've got a 70% chance of prevailing. So at that point, we were able to use that information to say, we have a strong position, but it's not guaranteed. So let's be reasonable, but let's also not, take a lower settlement than we think is reasonable. And that was a tool that it was a way that was able to give us additional information and an advantage in that negotiation. Could it have been wrong? Absolutely. But when you're giving it that context, I feel like the answers that it's outputting are accurate more often than not. So I can give you another example here. So let's say, for example, that you're trying to yourself right now predict the outcome of appellate arguments in your state. So what is the context that you might want to include? Well, number one, you might want to include transcripts from oral argument. Those are things that are not in the public record generally. You can go and watch those videos though, and you can get transcripts or order transcripts from prior cases that you think are relevant, or general transcripts if you just want to have a basis of understanding. You would then give it the context of dockets and pleadings from those cases that you think are relevant to understand what's going on. And then from that, you're able to then ask it questions. Like you're able to ask it about its procedural preferences of the court, or how often do certain attorneys appear? Like if I were to just ask ChatGPT, who are the attorneys that appear most before the Georgia Supreme Court? It's not going to give me a good answer. But if I give it a full listing of dockets from every case from the last 5 years, it's able to take in that data and very quickly tell you, these are the law firms and these are the people that are involved. And then we also then get into predicting outcomes. And we talked earlier about how right now, I think that somewhere between 78% of the time, it's predicting the outcome for the right reason. And we're doing that by giving it good context and good data. Now, let me give you another example of using existing data to predict outcomes. So let's say that this is a data set of criminals and we're trying to predict future crime. If we use this data set, we're going to get very, very bad information out. Because if we're using garbage data that is based on historical prejudices or just bad policy or just a sample size that is not appropriate, then we're going to get outcomes that are dangerous and bad. So imagine that this is the data set that we use to predict crimes or for sentencing or for giving loans or mortgages. This would give us something that is a very bad output. And you may say, well, Matt, that's obvious. But then what's not obvious is some of the inherent biases and prejudices that exist in the whole of human knowledge that is used to train these data sets. And so when we talk about how we trust these tools and how we train these tools, it's important to ask ourselves, what is the data that was being used? And then even if there wasn't a malicious intent on what data was selected, then what is the information that was implicit in it that we might want to control for, or maybe exclude that data entirely? And these are lessons that were not obvious. And it seems obvious when you look at a photo like that, but Google itself created a skin tool that was able to identify cancer early. And they forgot to, so the question here was like, are all criminals are black? And that's the point. Like, I want to be clear here. I'm not saying that all criminals are black. What I'm saying is that if you were to use a data set that had only black criminal defendants in it as your tool for identifying what future crime looked like, you're going to perpetuate something that is wrong. That doesn't mean that white people don't commit crimes. The point is, why would we use a data set that only had, a certain race or a certain gender or a certain ethnicity for a training model to predict future outcomes? And we also need to be mindful of what existing biases already exist in data and human history. Like, let's say, for example, that we were training on historical texts that thought that slavery was appropriate, or that, murder was more common, or dueling. We're going to get outcomes that are not appropriate from ChatGPT. And this is when we talk about alignment. And what I'm saying is that also Google has learned these lessons because they didn't train their data on a robust data set. They trained it on white skin tones to predict cancer. And what they did, and then the output was that it didn't work. It was busted. As soon as they started using it on brown skin individuals or even dark skin white people, the tool didn't work. And Microsoft learned the same thing. Microsoft was doing AI recognition tools for security and things like that. they didn't train it properly on dark skin tones, and therefore it just did not work. And so these are major companies who are on the forefront leading this, and they're making these very obvious mistakes. So if they're making these mistakes, then the question that you need to ask yourself when someone approaches you with a new product, for example, they say, hey, I've got this magical new product that will find legal research for you, or that will draft closing documents for your practice. The very first question out of your mouth should be, where did the data, what data did you train this on? How was that data formatted? Did you personally go through and clean that data up? Did you remove any data? Did you sanitize it? What about instances where, these closing documents or those cases resulted in criminal charges against the attorneys that did it? Did you remove those so that I know that my AI is not going to do the same thing? Or was there problems in that data where we've had case law change afterwards? These kinds of questions, I think, are very bad. And a question here is, your data set of criminals of all African-American men would most likely result in the same. Would a data set of all white men criminals produce the same results? And the question really is, because AI is inherently biased from the outset based on input build data, the changes of producing more diverse results is more likely from all white versus all black. I don't know the answer to that is the true answer. Because the question is, if you were to train solely on white images, does the implicit biases that may exist in the data as it originally existed, would that overcome what we'll call like the fine tuning? I don't know. I would suspect a little bit, but I think that this thing can pour gasoline on pre-existing biases and problems in the data that may be less so when you go counter to that data. And I don't know if I'm answering that question as well as I could, but it's a good question to ask. And the point here, though, is that these are things that you need to be asking yourself and the people who are approaching you with tools of understanding, where is this data coming from? And the other thing is the format. So ChatGPT and these tools work best with plain text. If you give it a PDF or you give it structured data that has not been turned into text, it may not do the right thing. So let me give you a practical example. Let's say that you plug in a bunch of PDFs of depositions. Well, they're going to really think that Veritext or whatever your court reporter is must be in a lot of cases with you and must be a really bad actor because they appear on every single page of your deposition, because they've got their watermark at the end of every page of the transcript. That kind of stuff can really impact and mess with the AI's training to understand the context. Same thing with case citations. When you have in the middle of a sentence, all cars must be red, and you have the citation, John V. Smith, whatever the case cite is, but some cars can be blue. In another case citation, it may not understand that John V. Red is part of a case citation and that the sentence that all cars must be blue except some can be red are connected. And so the question is like, who's the person, or what are the methods that are used to account for those kinds of problems in the data? And what are we doing to clean and sanitize it to make sure that we're getting good outcomes? All right. Let's get into some of the risks of using this data. So there's a whole gambit of things that run from just people not understanding how it works and making mistakes, all the way through tools that are being used to hurt people, undermine humanity, and potentially even like lose control of society itself. And these are not hyperbolous things. These are dangerous, scary things. So let's start with just errors. If I were to just ask, and you can do this right now, log into any ChatGPT, Gemini, whatever program you've got right now, and ask it how people without hands or how people without arms wash their hands. So how do people without arms wash their hands? And what will the AI come back with? Well, it says that people are resilient and that even though you have a disability, you can overcome any problem. Like some people will learn to use their feet to wash their hands. Some people will learn how to develop machines to wash their hands. Some people will get other people to help without understanding the core problem of, if they don't have arms, they don't have hands. And this is with the most recent, most powerful models. You ask whatever AI you want right now this question, because I did this yesterday. you're going to get an answer very similar to this, where it's just going to interpose something that is just like dead wrong. And everyone here has heard examples of ChatGPT hallucinating or citing wrong cases. And in many of these instances, it's because the lawyers were negligent in how they used the AI. So, for example, they would go to it. So someone just popped into the chat and I love this. They asked the question, they got the same answer. Adaptive devices and using the foot. People without arms or with limited arm mobility with various ways to maintain hygiene. Same answer. So like, it doesn't get it. And there's all these riddles that are out there as well that you can ask ChatGPT that it just doesn't understand. But same thing here with case law. It understands like what a case is supposed to look like. And so sometimes it'll just make that up, and that's called hallucination. Most of the time though, at least in the ones that I've seen, it's because of bad prompting or using much less powerful AI models. This is from 2023. You don't hear a lot about this recently, mainly because they've done that when I talked about the refinement and the alignment. They won't allow it to cite cases that aren't real as part of like it's protecting the public and those kinds of things. But what we are still seeing is deep fakes, misinformation, fraud. You saw earlier how I was able to add my face to a video. We're seeing individuals who are being targeted with Zoom meetings where people are using deep fakes to pretend to be bosses or financial people who then steal money. We're seeing phone calls. Almost every single person on this Zoom will get an AI phone call sometime in the next year that is some form of scam. Like this is going to be universal because a lot of these are just like the same problems as we've had just with new technology. But because of AI, it's scaling up. Like instead of the scammers being able to do 500 to 5,000 scam calls a day, they're able to do 5 million scam calls a day. So the same problems are going to get worse. And then the tools that they have to do them are just going to get better. And we'll see as well, the job loss that comes from this. So Steve Jobs recently said that if you were going to read any book on AI, it would be The Coming Wave. And I've read The Coming Wave, and I don't know if it's the only book that I would recommend that you read on AI, but the people who are quote unquote in the room where it's happening and the people who are in positions of power really listen to and respect the faults of the coming wave. And what it says and what Steve Jobs is not saying is that his core thesis is that more than 50% of jobs will be lost to AI by 2030. So we're going to see massive changes in the way that we work, in the way that we live, in the way that people do knowledge work, and even in the way they do physical labor. And we're already seeing signs of this. So Salesforce just announced that they are not hiring a single software engineer in 2025. This is one of the top 5 hirers of engineers in the world. They're not hiring a single new software engineer this year. And the reason why is because they've had so many advancements and productivity boosts from AI that they've not even been able to fully implement them yet. And the only entity capable of implementing them is the AI itself. Then we get to using the AI to actually do physical violence. So we saw in 2023 predictions that AI will be used to kill people, to make war. And now here we are, not even a year and a half later, and we're seeing that not only are they tools being used by the military, but anyone with minor tools can use AI to create tools that will kill, will harm. And the way that you can do this with your own AI is you can give it access to a drone with a gun and some sort of pneumatic arm, and then just tell it to play a game. Your game is to find the first person wearing a red hat and drop the water balloon on them. Like it doesn't take much to convince the AI that it's not doing violence. And then they're able to use these tools to use drones to kill people. And the Pentagon now says that the AI this is a direct quote, AI is helping the military kill people faster than ever before. And that they're reassuring people that they will use, I apologize, that's not the direct quote, that's the headline from it. But the direct quote that is later in this article is saying that they are more efficiently making war than ever before. The efficiently making war part is their ability to exact violence in a wartime situation, and they're reassuring people that humans will be able to. There's a question here about how accurate is the facial recognition. The answer is who knows? Like they claim that right now TSA claims that their AI is accurate 99% of the time. How that's tested, I don't know. How accurate is that? I don't know. And I suspect that the people who are doing the testing don't actually know that, other than the sample size that they've chosen is correct. But let's go back to those questions that we talked about earlier. Did they test that on all skin types? Did they test that on all cultures? Did they test that on all representations of humans? I don't know. I would suspect not. So I would give some of these claims that it is, perfect, not much weight. But that doesn't change the fact that it's going to continue to get stronger and stronger. And this, to me, the scariest part of all is that we're not even at the main course yet. Everything that I've shown you and everything that I've talked to you about so far is not even the appetizer. It's like the invitation to come to dinner. And because the real meal is something called AGI. AGI is artificial general intelligence. And there are a lot of definitions of AGI, but the one that I think is the most consistent is a artificial intelligence tool that can do any, and I mean any human task better than any human being. That means that it's able to perform any task better than the best expert in that field can perform the same task. That is AGI. And what are we seeing from the people in the field? Well, the head of Anthropic, which is Claude, says that he thinks that they'll be able to get there by 2027. And that's just someone who is the head of a company. Maybe we don't care what he thinks. Maybe he's trying to garner investment. But what we do see from the intellectual world is that they're seeing this happen in the studies that they're doing. They're seeing sparks of AGI in what they would consider ability and reasoning tools that are mimicking what we'll call the sparks of AGI in the existing tools. And this is just GPT-4. Remember, we're now at least 10 models more advanced than that now. And we also know that the individuals, when other people aren't watching, are saying the same things. This is a quote from Elon Musk when they're talking, and this is not something that he tweeted. This is not something that he said to be kind of provocative. This is a email that was produced in litigation. This is an internal email between Elon Musk and OpenAI, and they're discussing the implications of their training data and the potential for litigation. And what does he say? He says that by the time those lawsuits are resolved, we will have a digital god, a god that is more dangerous than nuclear bombs. And that's what they're saying behind closed doors, not when they're just trying to manufacture investment or spark interest in their products. Are they right? No one knows, but at least they seem to very seriously believe that they are right. And it comes down to this concept of exponential growth, which is impossible for humans to understand. I don't fully understand it myself because of just the nature of how it works. So when we talk about AI intelligence, it's helpful to kind of look at the difference between, the smartest human and a dumb person. And it's the yellow line and green line in this graphic. And so what we would expect is for, the AI to continue on a trajectory where over time it gets smarter than the dumbest human, but it kind of tailors off at the smartest human, or at least it goes a little bit over. But in reality, what we're seeing in real time is the exponential curve, where the difference between a smart person and, the dumbest person that ever lived is actually very small. And the difference between the AI and the smartest human on Earth is going to be very large. That's the easiest way to understand that. Wait, but why has a great article. It's 8 parts. If you want to deep dive into this concept and this graphic and what it means for the development of AI, I'd highly recommend it. And we're already seeing kind of the proof in the pudding here. So just with GPT-4, we're seeing that it outperforms students at the SAT, the LSAT, the MBE, all of those kinds of standardized tests, it's outperforming the average student on everything but pizza. I don't believe that AI will ever take our love of pizza away from us. We will always love pizza more. And so no matter how doom and gloomy some of this may seem, I hope that you know that we will always have that. There's also a test called Humanity's Last Exam, which is a series of very special expert level questions that have been explicitly excluded from training data to identify kind of where is AI on kind of the human intelligence scale. And right now, at least as of last week, it was getting about 13% of that correct. Now, your average human would get about 2% of that correct. So it's already performing better than the average human, but we're now talking about the best humans. Like if we were to take all of the best humans and let them answer what they're best at, only about 13%. Well, yesterday, ChatGPT released something called Deep Research. And Deep Research scored 26% on that test. So it jumped more than double from the next best next best AI on that tool. I've been using Deep Research over the last day, and I would say that tracks with my experience. I've seen it do some things and show me some stuff that were new information to me on fields that I consider myself an expert in. And it, even in cases where like we've been in discovery for 2 years, it was able to give me some additional tools and information that I didn't have that I'm very excited to serve discovery about. But it has really been transformative. I think it's going to be transformative, and whatever comes next is going to be even more so. But all of that is to say this, which is that no one knows what happens next. If someone pretends that they do know, they're lying to you. Elon Musk doesn't know what's going to happen. OpenAI and Sam Altman don't know what will happen. Geoffrey Hinton, the godfather of AI, has no idea. No one knows. And that kind of puts us in kind of a weird place as humanity. So, take that for what it's worth. All right. Let's talk about the legal and ethical implications. I've seen a couple of questions come through on these. And so I want to highlight four ethical things that I think are important. So number one is Rule 1.1, which is the duty of competence. And that is the model rule right now is going to add with the technologies to the standard for competence. Many states have, and I'm working with several bars across the country on this specific issue, are going to add technology to the standard for competency to make sure that lawyers themselves are aware of these tools. Even if you don't use them, it's important to understand them and know what they're about and how they're used. Confidentiality is Rule 1.6. It's important to understand and know which of these tools use your data for training, which of these tools are able to not use your data for training. There are different tiers. So for example, ChatGPT Teams falls under your standard Microsoft license that would apply to like your Word or your SharePoint, where that data is not used for training, or at least they say that it's not. So in that instance, could you use confidential information? My position is yes. But with the free models where training is and including your data is mandatory, no, you should not use confidential information. And it's important to understand and go through the terms of service. I'm not going to lay out for you all of the models and tools and what their current standards are because they change so quickly. So my only advice here is to just make sure that you are Googling that or looking at the terms of service to understand where they are on that scale of confidentiality. And if you can purchase an advanced license that will exclude your data from training, you should do so if you intend to use it for client data. And the other one is 1.4, about informing your client of what tools that you're using and how their data is used. This is the same stuff that people are already talking about, but I want to highlight it for you, as well as the unauthorized practice of law that's kind of implicit in all of the 1.1 rules. A bunch of states have different rules on that. But you absolutely should not be using ChatGPT without reviewing it or any of these AI tools without exercising the proper thoroughness and preparation. That's saying the way that you would if a clerk gave you, or a younger associate gave you work, you must review it. You must check the case citations. Anything short of that, I would argue, is malpractice. is a violation of the rules. There's just no real way around that. There's a question here: is there a way to find which states allow these tools or have any restrictions? Currently, none. There are no states currently that have restrictions on these rules. There are individual courts that do. And there are multiple states that are considering these rules, and they're specifically looking at the duty of diligence and making sure that you're competent in technology, as well as confidential. I mean, it's these 4 rules that they're considering. And none of them have done anything. There's been some advisory opinions out there, but no official changes to model rules that I'm aware of. If there were changes, it would be New York, I think is the closest to doing that. And then Texas after them. You've also got substantive legal questions. And this is something that we can talk about all day long, which is, what happens when your AI damages your neighbor's property, or the AI hacks into someone's bank account, or the AI, affirmatively, does something that is against social norms, causing physical harm or emotional harm. Like, who's responsible for it? Is it the person that made the AI? Is it the person that's using the AI? Is it the person who is training the AI? Is it the company? These are questions that we've just got to go through. There's a question here: what I think constitutes legal malpractice. I think legal malpractice would be using an AI tool and passing off its final work product without review. I don't think that's and I don't think that's a controversial statement. I think it would be wildly inappropriate to take an output from an AI tool and wholesale turn it over without an attorney review. We've also got questions of copyright, like who owns the images, who owns what about pro se using the AI tools? I'll talk about that as we get through these last couple of slides. We also got questions of copyright, who owns this stuff, who owns the output. The U.S. Copyright Office says that you can't copyright images and books that are made by ChatGPT. We've also got defamation claims about where AI says bad things. Like right now, if you were to ask some of these AIs, ChatGPT doesn't do this anymore, but some of the others will, output a list of the people most likely to be child predators, or most likely to abuse their spouse, or most likely to have a drug addiction. It will output a list of names. Or you can give it, of these 5 people, which one is the most likely to do this horrible thing? ChatGPT will give you some of the AI tools will give you an analysis and output names. Does that constitute defamation? I don't know. We're going to find out. There's a case right here in Georgia, Walters v. OpenAI, that was in federal court, just got remanded back. We'll see what happens with that case as they kind of percolate that through the court system. And then we've got the courts themselves, which are schizophrenic, to say the kindest way. We've got judges in courts that are forcing you to not use AI, to disclose when you use AI, requiring you to use AI. It's all over the place. We've got Supreme Court Justice Roberts, who came out with a statement that said for everyone to please just calm down and stop making orders, at least on the federal level, without working through like at least the district's, consortium, that helps people make these standing rules, and asking judges to stop doing piecemeal orders. Has not stopped them. In Pennsylvania, a judge in the Eastern District has a rule out that requires disclosure of using generative AI in any filing. Like everything you have to file, he says, you need to state whether you use generative AI in it. I think those rules are misguided only because you aren't in control of that anymore. Like Westlaw, Lexis, Justia, all of those companies now are using AI to help you write better briefs, do better things, and it's just baked into the products. So I think that requiring you to disclose it, I think, is a false premise just because it is so baked into it. But hopefully we'll have better guidance from the court systems over the coming year, but don't hold your breath, which is why I think it's important for you to exercise your own judgment in doing these things the right way. And we're kind of coming towards the end here, so I want to go over kind of the recommendations. So the first one is to make an effort to really get engaged on these issues and continue learning. It can kind of feel like you're drinking out of a fire hose. And I want you to know, like, you're still in the early end. I mean, this stuff's only 2 or 3 years old at this point. Some of these tools are days old. So, like, you're definitely, like, not behind, not behind the 8 ball. Like, if anything, you're far ahead. If you're on the CLE, it means that you're on the bleeding edge of understanding these things. You're in the top 1% of the world of knowing how AI works. If you're watching this presentation. And same thing is of figuring out how to use it and where you do it. There's a lot of kind of shiny things out there, people selling products and promoting products that don't do anything or are just rewraps of ChatGPT or Llama or other AI tools. It's important to just ask, what does this tool do? Where's the data come from? What's under the hood? And make sure that it's something that's actually solving a problem in your practice. You're not just going to introduce AI for the sake of introducing AI. And then on the ethical stuff, like, you have a couple of these questions here, one of which is, what if an attorney uses ChatGPT and a pro se doesn't know about that? Is that unethical? So we're talking, well, I think what they're asking here is, like, when a pro se person is using ChatGPT, is that the unauthorized practice of law? My position is I don't know. But there are a lot of bars who are studying that exact question, and I don't want to put my finger on the scale on that question until we've seen the data and the input from the various people who are a lot smarter than me on what their approach to that question is. I have opinions, but I'm just not ready to share them on that exact issue yet, simply because there are a lot of smart people studying that question, and they're trying to do it in an intellectually honest way, and I want to let that process play out. Also, if you're wanting to do a deeper dive on these things, you can also look at Justia's other, this is the AI song I made for it. You can also look at the other CLEs that they've put together on AI. Sarah Anderson has a really, really good one that kind of dives more into the nuts and bolts of the questions that you guys had about the ethics and practical implications using this at your firm. So if you feel like I didn't cover those issues thoroughly, you should go and watch Sarah's presentation, which does a fantastic job. And if you thought that I didn't do enough real world examples with prompts that you can use or how you can use it in your practice, go and watch Greg Siskind's presentation. He's got 30 plus examples and, like, real world prompts that he used in his presentation. So go and watch that one if you want to see examples of, like, rewriting your bio or writing articles for your website. He did a really good presentation on that. And then finally, I've got about 20 to 30 hours worth of content at wfirm.com/AI, where we do deep dives into prompt engineering or into image generation or text creation or making your own tools for processing medical records or doing discovery, as well as some models and examples of things that you can make yourself to help improve your practice. And those tools are there. You can also email me. I try to respond to all of the emails, and as well as just kind of, want to know how you're using these tools. And that kind of concludes my presentation. So thank you guys very much for having me.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Matt, for your presentation about the scope of AI and how it's impacting legal practice, as well as our world as a whole. Thank you all as well for the wonderful questions that you asked during the webinar, and thank you, Matt, for your thoughtful responses. We want to thank all of you for joining us for another Justia webinar. As I did at the top of the presentation, I want to remind you all of the services that are available for you through our Justia Elevate website platform. Justia Elevate is our groundbreaking WordPress-based platform that's customized specifically for lawyers and law firms. And as today's presentation did focus on AI and the tools that it can provide, I do want to mention our Justia AI writer that is available through Justia Elevate. It's designed specifically to help you create high-quality legal content for various practice areas and legal topics, as well as boosting your overall website SEO. So if you'd like to learn more, you can go to elevate.justia.com. Have such a great day. Thank you so much. Thanks for watching. We hope you enjoyed this video, and if you did enjoy it, please click the like button and subscribe to our channel for more videos on law practice and legal marketing. See you in our next video.